What if the so-called Dark Ages weren't as dark as the history books have painted them? What if beneath the dust of records filled with war, plague, and ruin, there shimmered a world lit by the glow of precious metals, a golden light that shaped power and determined the fate of early medieval Europe? Picture a Gaul not only of damp stone fortresses and muddy roads, but of a kingdom where gold was more than a treasure to be locked away. It was a subtle weapon capable of redrawing the map of power itself. In the hands of the Merovingian kings, from gleaming Byzantine solidus coins to tombs overflowing with gold-crowned regalia and jewel-studded weapons, every artifact was a fragment of a story history has tried to bury. This isn't just a tale of wealth. It's about how gold became the silent heartbeat sustaining the entire political and economic system. From grand coronations to whispered deals between lords, gold was both the proof of authority and the promise of stability in an age of upheaval. And when the curtain of the Dark Ages is pulled back, we may find that this light never truly went out. It has simply been waiting for its moment to shine once more on secrets that, for over 1,000 years, have never been fully told. When the Western Roman Empire officially collapsed in 476, Europe did not instantly sink into the pitch-black darkness that so many textbooks still imagine. The Roman roads were still there, spanning rivers with bridges sturdy enough to bear the weight of heavy wagons and the hooves of war horses. In the cities, though emptier now, traces of urban life remained. What vanished the fastest wasn't architecture or law, but the central machinery of power itself. And with it went the tightly controlled flow of gold once regulated by Rome's tax system. The precious metal didn't disappear. It simply changed course, seeking new hands strong enough to protect it, bargain with it, and rule through it. In Gaul, a land that had once been a vital link in Rome's administrative and military network, the vacuum of authority was suddenly clear. Small towns once tied to Roman trade hubs now had to find their own protectors. Local warlords rose to prominence, and into that gap pushed the Franks from the north and northeast. They weren't strangers. For decades, Frankish groups had been hired as border guards, given land in exchange for loyalty, or served as mercenaries in the Roman army. But when the old order dissolved, the line between ally and conqueror blurred, and they began shaping the fate of the land for themselves. In the hands of Frankish leaders, gold immediately became a tool of power. It wasn't merely loot to be locked away. It was a means to nurture loyalty, buy off former rivals, and display status before allies. Gold came from many sources: plundering wealthy southern cities, long-distance trade, exchanging Baltic amber, Lorraine salt, and Provençal wine for Byzantine gold or Danubian silver. Every coin returning from a campaign or a market stall was a link connecting war, economy, and politics. By the late 5th century, Clovis, the young leader of the Salian Franks, launched expansion campaigns with a dual strategy: conquer to seize treasure, then use that very treasure to cement his rule. Loyal warriors were rewarded with gold and fine goods, ensuring they would keep fighting under his banner. Defeated chieftains were granted golden privileges, transforming from enemies into allies or vassals. To Clovis, gold had to keep moving. It could never lie still, because as it flowed through his hands, his power was renewed and extended. At this point, gold carried two roles at once. On one hand, it was an economic measure convertible into any tangible value. On the other, it was a visible emblem of authority. A gold-brooched cloak, an intricately carved sword, or a small jewel-studded crown could send a message stronger than any written treaty. To the common people, seeing gold in the hands of their rulers stirred memories of Rome's wealth and order, giving them a sense of safety amid political change. Religious ceremonies, too, gleamed with gold. Altars adorned with gilded chalices, priests' robes edged in gold thread, and royal rituals performed beneath the reflected light of crowns and ceremonial swords. That presence not only continued Roman tradition, but also reinforced the legitimacy of the new dynasty. More importantly, from this period onward, gold in Gaul began to be struck, shaped, and engraved by local craftsmen. The first Tias coins bearing the names and symbols of Frankish kings appeared, serving as both currency and political declaration. The old order had passed, and a new kingdom was rising. In that golden light, the Merovingian story began to take form, ushering in an era where this precious metal would become the heartbeat of power, commerce, and legacy for generations to come. As the Franks consolidated their hold over Gaul, the land's unique advantage quickly became clear. It sat squarely at the crossroads of nearly every major trade artery in Western Europe. From the north came river fleets carrying amber, furs, and beeswax down the Rhine and Meuse. From the south, wine, olive oil, and Mediterranean pottery moved north along the old Roman roads. From the west, salt and dried fish from the Atlantic coast traveled deep inland. And from the east, Byzantine gold and Danubian silver followed the steps of merchants and envoys. Gaul was not merely a way station for goods, it possessed its own strategic resources. The salt mines of Lorraine, iron and lead from the Massif Central, and the fertile Seine and Loire river valleys feeding thousands of households. Though it lacked natural gold deposits, Gaul's position made it a hub for storing and redistributing precious metals. Under Rome, gold had flowed through here as part of the empire's economic bloodstream. Under the Franks, that current continued, now guided by a dynasty that knew how to direct it for its own gain. The combination of stable agriculture, rich mineral deposits, and prime trade routes gave Gaul an unusually resilient economy during what is often labeled Europe's chaotic age. Straddling the Latin South and the Germanic North, the Frankish crown became the gatekeeper for goods and gold moving across the continent. This role brought not only material wealth, but also political leverage. Anyone seeking trade, alliance, or simply peace had to pass through this gate. For the Merovingians, gold was more than currency. It was the language of diplomacy. A Lombard or Visigoth delegation arriving at court would be welcomed with ceremony and would depart carrying freshly minted gold coins along with jeweled weapons or ornaments, gifts that spoke of generosity but stamped the giver's authority. In royal coronations and funerals, gold took center stage, covering crowns, thrones, sword hilts, and ceremonial robes. What set their gold apart was the craftsmanship. Gallic goldsmiths inherited Roman techniques and blended them with Germanic and Celtic styles, producing swirling motifs and cloisonné inlays of garnet or colored glass with a level of precision rarely matched. This is why Merovingian gold artifacts were not only economic assets, but also symbolic works of art. The fame of Merovingian Gaul spread across Europe. Anglo-Saxon traders, Scandinavian chieftains, Byzantine envoys, and Arab merchants all knew it as an open treasure chest. Whoever controlled Gaul controlled the routes through which gold traveled and, by extension, the economic pulse of half the continent. Yet wealth, like a lantern in the night, drew both far-reaching hands and disputes from within. In truth, the richer Gaul became, the more it turned into a battlefield for ambition. Branches of the Merovingian royal family clashed over control of the gold supply. Each faction sought dominance over lucrative trade routes, mineral resources, and the right to tax along the rivers. These rivalries not only destabilized the realm, but also invited outside powers to interfere. In this volatile climate, one figure emerged with the ability to transform Gaul's economic potential into overwhelming political strength. Clovis, more than a brilliant warrior, understood that gold, when wielded strategically, could build a dynasty as solid as bedrock. From here, the story of Merovingian gold entered a new chapter. It was a chapter of conquests, alliances, and decisions that would shape an entire age. Before the name Clovis thundered across the map of European power, the Franks were still a loose collection of tribes, divided into two main branches: the Sulian Franks along the lower Rhine and the Ripuarian Franks farther upstream. Scattered along the great rivers of northern Gaul, they lived among the native population, influenced by the remnants of Roman centers still clinging to life. Their relationship with the Roman world was a mixture of cooperation and rivalry. Many Frankish groups served as mercenaries in the imperial army, granted land and settlement rights in return. But when opportunity arose, they did not hesitate to seize territory by force. Their society bore the unmistakable stamp of a warrior culture. Each community functioned as an extended clan where the leader was both the sword-bearing war captain and the distributor of spoils. Written laws barely existed. Power was measured in reputation, generosity, and the ability to safeguard wealth for one's followers. In such an environment, gold, especially Roman gold, was decisive. It kept warriors loyal, purchased better weapons, and forged strategic intertribal marriages. The Franks quickly recognized the advantage of their geography. They controlled key stretches of river where merchants from the North Sea had to pass to reach the deep interior of Gaul. Collecting tolls, trading goods, and at times carrying out selective raids provided a steady stream of precious metals. Part of this gold, silver, and jewelry was immediately redistributed to maintain loyalty. The finest and most valuable pieces were reserved for important ceremonies: a chieftain's funeral, an heir's wedding, or a treaty sealing the promise of peace. Notably, even before a unified kingdom existed, the Franks had already developed a distinct aesthetic in gold work. The cloisonné technique, dividing the metal surface into tiny cells with thin gold strips, then inlaying gemstones or colored enamel, appeared early in artifacts from the 4th to 5th centuries. Many brooches, rings, and sword hilts were not merely decorative, but also statements of authority and tribal identity. Animal motifs, such as hunting birds, horses, and wolves, were carved in relief or set with stones, symbols of strength and of the owner's destiny. Yet it was this very fragmentation of power that proved their greatest weakness. Frankish groups often clashed, especially over control of lucrative trade routes or strategic mineral sources. Each leader ruled his own territory and followed his own authority. None had the stature to impose a common law. This left them vulnerable to larger powers such as the Visigoths in the south or the Burgundians in the east. In this setting, the quiet longing for a figure who could unite the scattered branches became an unspoken desire among many warriors and nobles. Intertribal marriages, temporary pacts, and small-scale skirmishes like test runs for a greater unification. As political and religious upheavals from the Mediterranean reached Gaul, and as rival powers weakened, the stage was set for a new player. He was a young chieftain of the Salian branch, skilled in both warfare and the art of ruling through gold. He would not conquer by the sword alone, but use wealth to win allegiance, transforming gold from mere plunder into the very foundation of power. Clovis would achieve what previous generations had only dreamed of: uniting the Franks under a single banner and redefining the role of gold in a kingdom, not as a display of riches, but as the scaffolding for a new order built to endure for generations. When Clovis rose to power in the late 5th century, he inherited more than a fragmented territory and the title of chieftain. What he truly received was the strategic legacy that generations of Franks before him had patiently built: a network of trade routes, alliances still being tested, and a treasury of gold large enough to turn ambitious plans into reality. From this foundation, Clovis quickly proved himself to be more than a skilled warrior. He was a builder of power, a ruler who understood how to make gold the lifeblood of the kingdom's political body. His first campaigns against the Alemanni revealed exactly how Clovis fused sword and gold. Each victory brought spoils of war, but rather than letting them lie idle in the treasury, He distributed them with deliberate purpose. Loyal warriors were richly rewarded to secure their unwavering allegiance. Defeated leaders, if willing to submit, received gold and privileges, transforming them from enemies into vassals. Under Clovis, gold was never static wealth. It had to flow. And as it flowed, it carried the authority of the one who controlled it. The greatest political turning point came around 496 when Clovis converted to Catholicism. This was not merely a religious statement, but a masterstroke of diplomacy. By placing himself under the spiritual patronage of the Church, a force rapidly growing in influence across Gaul, Clovis opened new channels of trade and strengthened his legitimacy among his people. Gold again played a central role. Lavish donations to the Church signaled piety while serving as political investments, ensuring the clergy's support and forging close ties to the spiritual centers of power. His decisive victory over the Visigoths at Vouillé in 507 made Clovis the ruler of nearly all Gaul. Treasure from the wealthy southern cities, including gold from the Visigothic royal hoard, poured into the Frankish treasury. Unlike many tribal chiefs who kept gold as personal property, Clovis sought to create a system of circulating coinage and precious goods inspired by Rome and Byzantium, yet marked by a distinct Merovingian identity. Gold coins bearing Clovis's image and symbols began to appear, functioning both as currency and as declarations of sovereignty. They paid soldiers' wages, set the value of goods, and sealed trade agreements. In a Europe reshaping itself after Rome's collapse, issuing one's own coin was an unmistakable sign that the Frankish kingdom had become an independent center of power. Clovis also knew that gold could etch his name into collective memory through tangible symbols. He commissioned finely crafted gold pieces for royal ceremonies, religious festivals, and commemorations of military victories. Beneath the candlelight of churches, gold reflected not only physical light, but also the image of a king who was both warrior and nation builder. When Clovis died in 511, he left behind a vast kingdom and a clear principle of power. Gold was the tool that bound loyalty, shaped politics, and reinforced authority. Even though his sons divided the realm among themselves, that principle endured as a golden thread woven through the Merovingian dynasty. From here, the story entered a new phase, one in which gold was no longer merely the currency of conquest, but the standard of power itself, measured by stability and prestige, a legacy the Franks would inherit and expand in the century to come. By the 6th century, the Merovingian dynasty had inherited from Clovis not only a unified kingdom, but also a gold-based monetary foundation, a strategic choice that solidified their standing in a Europe still unsteady after the collapse of Rome. In an age where political stability was fragile at best, gold retained lasting value and universal acceptance, becoming the shared language of both trade and diplomacy. The Merovingian kings understood that the strength of a currency lay in trust. Following the example of Rome and Byzantium, they maintained the weight and purity of their gold coins as a promise to both their subjects and foreign partners. The Byzantine solidus, famed for its stability, served as the model. At first, most of the gold in circulation was either imported solidi or coins remitted from war booty. Over time, however, Merovingian mints began producing tremises, 1/3 of a solidus, bearing the names and symbols of Frankish kings, a move that both affirmed their sovereignty and upheld a dependable gold standard. Maintaining that standard was not just a technical decision made in the minting halls, it was a political statement. A gold coin that held its value year after year was proof that the dynasty was strong enough to guarantee and protect it. When a Lombard, Visigoth, or Arab merchant held a Merovingian gold piece, they knew they were dealing with a kingdom whose word could be trusted. That trust became a form of soft capital, extending the Merovingians' economic influence far beyond their political borders. But keeping that standard was a constant challenge. Gold supplies were unpredictable, dependent on long-distance trade, war plunder, and the recycling of precious objects. The Merovingian kings had to ensure that gold flowed into the kingdom faster than it flowed out, which meant aggressively expanding trade relations and securing treaties with regions rich in precious metals. Trade routes from Africa, the Mediterranean, and Eastern Europe had to be kept open to prevent supply disruptions. Each gold coin carried symbolic weight as well. On its face, the ruler's portrait or emblem was carefully engraved, often paired with a cross or a military symbol. In a society where most people were illiterate, coinage became one of the few visual mediums through which the king could speak to subjects he would never meet in person. The gold standard also reshaped the domestic economy. Pricing goods and collecting taxes in gold created a unified transaction system, reducing reliance on barter or local currencies made of silver and bronze. Major trade hubs, cities, and markets often grew up around mints or tax collection points, fueling the rise of a merchant and artisan class. Yet this dependence on gold left the Merovingian economy vulnerable to sudden shocks. If war, raiding, or natural disaster disrupted supply lines, a shortage of gold would quickly impact prices, incomes, and political credibility. Merovingian rulers had to remain proactive, ready to expand territory or seek new alliances simply to keep the flow of gold uninterrupted. At its height, the gold standard made the Frankish kingdom one of the most stable economic centers in Western Europe, even as other regions struggled with monetary crises. But in the Merovingian world, gold was more than just coinage. It was transformed into objects of ceremony, symbolism, and artistry, pieces whose value far exceeded their weight in metal. And these creations open the next chapter in the story of royal power. At first glance, Merovingian gold coins may seem like nothing more than a means of payment, but in the 6th and 7th centuries, they also served as declarations cast in metal, broadcasting messages of power, stability, and the dynasty's reach. Every coin minted carried not just an exchange value, but also acted as a piece of visual communication, where every line and symbol was chosen with care to reinforce royal authority. In the beginning, Merovingian trimises and solidi bore a clear Byzantine influence. Classical-style bust portraits, the Christian cross, and other religious emblems common across the Christian world. This borrowing was not passive imitation. It was a way to signal that the Frankish kingdom stood among the era's great powers. Placing Christian symbols on coins also linked the king's secular rule to divine blessing, a message unmistakable to a population newly converted to the faith. Over time, Merovingian rulers began incorporating more local elements into their designs. Some coins replaced the royal portrait with crowns, warrior emblems, or animal motifs symbolizing strength and protection. Details such as sword hilts, round shields, and Germanic-style interlacing patterns blended with classical forms, creating a hybrid style that was familiar to international merchants while stirring a sense of native pride. In a society where most people were illiterate, coinage was one of the few ways a king could reach tens of thousands of subjects he would never meet in person. Holding a gold coin stamped with the royal mark meant possessing not only economic value, but also a fragment of the ruler's authority. That coin could pass from a warrior's hand through a borderland market into the pouch of a distant merchant, carrying the king's image every step of the way. The symbolic weight of gold coins often outlasted their monetary role. In distant regions, far from the centers of power, where gold was not used for everyday exchange, Merovingian coins might be kept as keepsakes or talismans. A trimisus could be strung into a necklace, sewn into ceremonial robes, or placed in a grave as an offering to the afterlife. In diplomacy, gold coins were carefully chosen gifts. When envoys from the Lombards, Anglo-Saxons, or the Arab world arrived, presenting them with freshly struck, gleaming coins marked with unmistakable royal symbols was more than generosity. It was a way to carry the Merovingian image beyond the kingdom's borders. Each coin became a silent yet enduring ambassador. The consistent reputation of Merovingian coinage over successive reigns also helped sustain the gold standard described earlier. When design and weight remained stable, distant merchants needed only to recognize the familiar form to trust its value without weighing or testing each piece. But that very prestige brought a risk. Local chieftains or regional powers sometimes minted imitations, copying Merovingian designs with slight alterations to assert their own authority. At its peak, Merovingian gold coinage was the fusion of material value, political prestige, and visual messaging. It was both an economic tool and a channel of propaganda, ensuring the royal image reached places where military force or administrative control could not. And once gold had established itself as a language of power, it did not stop at coinage. That golden light spread to crowns, weapons, and ceremonial treasures, where worth was measured not just by metal weight, but by its power to etch royal authority deep into collective memory. If gold was the language of power in commerce and diplomacy, then in the royal ceremonies of the Merovingians, it was the most persuasive weapon of all, a light that made authority sacred and almost impossible to challenge. At coronations, funerals, and major diplomatic events, gold was not merely lavish decoration. It was the halo that enveloped the entire ritual, turning every moment into a performance of both material grandeur and symbolic meaning. A Merovingian crown was unlike the heavy, rigid coronets of later dynasties. It was often a supple band of precious metal, sometimes set with gemstones or hung with fine gold chains that swayed with the king's movements, scattering light as he walked. Beneath the flicker of church candles, these details reflected more than light. They reflected a belief that the king's power came from both earth and heaven, belonging to humanity, yet under divine protection. Royal attire was another golden proclamation. The robes of the king and queen were sewn from fabrics imported from Byzantium or Syria, embroidered with gold thread, and at times adorned with thin sheets of gold. When the king entered a cathedral or great hall, his entire figure seemed like a living mass of gold, surrounded by the echo of acclamations and the awe of the crowd. This was not mere luxury. It was a declaration that the dynasty could to the farthest trade networks and bring their golden light back to the heart of power. Even ceremonial weapons became gilded symbols. The king's sword was not simply a weapon of war, but a token of justice and sovereignty. Its hilt and scabbard were wrapped in gold, inlaid with gemstones, and carved with motifs of religious or legendary significance. When a general received such a sword from the king's hands, it was not just the granting of military authority, but the transfer of a portion of the crown's prestige, sealed in the gleam of precious metal. In the religious sphere, gold appeared in royal gifts to the church. Chalices, reliquaries, altar crosses, often made of solid gold or thickly gilded and set with jewels. These pieces displayed piety while reinforcing the bond between royal and ecclesiastical power. When a Merovingian king offered gold to the church, it was not only an act of devotion, but a transaction of influence. The dynasty gave material light, and the church answered with spiritual light and legitimacy. Even royal funerals were bathed in gold. The king's body was laid in a coffin alongside jewelry, gilded weapons, and personal ceremonial objects. Here, gold was not only a symbol of rank, but a promise that the king's power would continue to shine in memory and legend long after his body had turned to dust. Together, these elements formed a golden language far beyond the realm of currency or material wealth. It told the people that the king ruled not only through law and armies, but as the center of a cosmos arranged by earthly might and divine blessing. And this light did not remain confined to palace or cathedral. It traveled with envoys, merchants, and armies, radiating across Europe. From here, Merovingian gold would begin another journey, not only adorning the throne, but forging golden roots that linked their power to the entire continent. The golden light of the Merovingians did not shine only in palaces and cathedrals. It spread along roads, rivers, and harbors, becoming the lifeblood of the kingdom. Every trade route and every shipment was a golden thread, linking Gaul to the other centers of power in early medieval Europe. Gold did not merely flow outward. It returned as well, carrying back stories, alliances, and new spheres of influence. To the south, the Mediterranean was the grand gateway. Ships left the ports of Provence and Marseille laden with salt, wine, furs, and local goods, and returned with luxury items from Byzantium and the Levant. On the homeward journey, Byzantine gold, famed for its purity and prestige, made its way into Gaul, enriching the treasuries of both royalty and nobility. At these ports, goods were not the only things exchanged. Political intelligence, diplomatic letters, and whispered promises of alliance traveled with them. The north opened onto another world, the North Sea and the Baltic, where Anglo-Saxon, Frisian, and Scandinavian traders brought amber, furs, honey, and beeswax to Gaul. Here, gold was not just a means of payment, but a token of friendship. A northern chieftain might leave Gaul with a golden brooch or a gemstone-studded necklace to take back to his tribe, a tangible seal of an alliance secured in precious metal. To the east, across the Rhine and through overland routes in Burgundy and Alemannia, gold flowed toward neighboring kingdoms and onto the Danube. This was the path linking Gaul to the commercial hubs of Italy and even Constantinople itself. Merchant caravans, envoys, and mercenaries traveling along this route carried not just goods, but gifts, among them Merovingian gold, prized for its fine design and reliable value. Equally important were the inland routes along the Loire, Seine, and Rhone, the backbone of domestic trade. Riverside towns became waypoints where gold changed hands from local merchants to long-distance traders. In this way, Merovingian coins reached not only the nobility, but also the far-off markets of the countryside, bringing the king's image to places political authority had yet to touch. Controlling the golden routes meant controlling the heartbeat of both the economy and politics. The Merovingian kings understood this well, stationing guards at strategic points, tax posts, riverside fortresses, and patrols protecting the caravans. Many of the most vital stretches were placed under direct royal oversight to ensure the flow of gold remained unbroken. Yet prosperity carried its own risks. Mediterranean pirates, northern highwaymen, and defiant local lords could all choke off a route. A single large-scale raid or the blockade of a port could rattle the royal treasury and shake merchants' confidence. For this reason, Merovingian policy wove together three strands: diplomacy to keep relations strong, military force to safeguard the routes, and economic measures to maintain circulation. Through this balance, the Merovingian gold network served not only commerce, but also the projection of power. Every coin that traveled hundreds of miles was a silent, enduring message. The Frankish dynasty was present wherever its gold reached. And once this current had been secured, Gaul entered an age of prosperity so remarkable that even foreign envoys admitted it was unmatched in Western Europe. As the 6th century gave way to the 7th, the gold network the Merovingians had patiently built reached its peak. Gaul now stood as the golden heart of Europe, drawing in precious metals from across the continent and pumping them outward through trade arteries strengthened by diplomacy, military protection, and legal control. The royal treasury swelled to a level that even foreign envoys openly acknowledged as unmatched in the West. In capitals such as Paris, Soissons, and Metz, the Merovingian court became a stage for displaying its wealth. During great festivals, stone halls blazed with the light of hundreds of candles, their glow reflected in cloaks embroidered with gold thread, in pearl and gold necklaces draped around noble women's necks, and in solid gold wine goblets passed from hand to hand. Each banquet was more than a feast. It was a performance of power, with every object carefully chosen to send a message that this dynasty's wealth was so great that nothing could shake it. The royal treasures went far beyond currency. Within the vaults of palaces and royal churches were massive jeweled crosses, gold-encased relics engraved with saints, exquisitely worked chalices, and gifts from distant courts. Egyptian gold necklaces, Byzantine mosaics, and gold-embroidered silks from Persia. Each artifact carried a story, the memory of a military campaign, the mark of a treaty, or the proof of a successful political marriage. Even architecture bore the mark of gold. Churches under royal patronage often had golden tesserae in their mosaics, transforming interiors into spaces that seemed lit by a sun captured within stone. The high altar might be clad in gold panels engraved with the king's name, affirming his role as benefactor. This was not only an act of piety, but also a statement that Frankish royal authority was blessed by both God and worldly fortune. Such wealth fostered a rising aristocracy, living in mansions adorned with gold and silver, employing teams of craftsmen to satisfy their luxurious tastes. Many families hoarded gold as political capital, ready to deploy it in support of a succession claim or the launch of a military campaign. In Gaul, gold was never static in vaults. It moved like a current of energy, sustaining alliances, but also sparking conflicts. Yet even in such brilliance, shadows crept in. Gold, however abundant, still depended on long-distance trade routes and political stability. The blockade of a key port or the loss of a luxury-producing region to an enemy could slow the flow of gold. And the very act of flaunting such riches began to attract covetous eyes, not only from neighboring kingdoms, but also from bands of free warriors willing to risk everything for a share of the treasure. In the memory of contemporaries, this was the true golden age of the Merovingians. Not because the land was entirely at peace, but because there was a sense that power and wealth had reached their zenith, a point where every ceremony, every building, and every alliance gleamed with gold. But, as with every peak in history, the far side could only slope downward, and often the most dazzling treasures hide the greatest secrets. For when they vanish, buried or turned into legend, they open entirely new and mysterious chapters in the Merovingian story. Among all the tales of treasures lost or faded into legend, there was one moment when the gold truly returned to the world: the discovery in 1653 of the tomb of Childeric, the father of Clovis, in Tournai, in what is now Belgium. This find not only illuminated a period long buried under the dust of time, but also stood as vivid, tangible proof of the dynasty's power and wealth in its earliest days. The story began when a laborer accidentally struck a burial chamber deep beneath the ground. As torchlight pierced the darkness, the glint of metal immediately flashed back, revealing hundreds of gold and gemstone objects that had lain undisturbed for over 1,000 years. At the center were items bound to the king's identity: a gold-hilted sword, a gem-inlaid spearhead, and brilliant cloisonné pieces. But what drew the most fascination were some 300 tiny golden bees crafted with astonishing precision, likely once sewn onto the king's cloak or crown, an ancient emblem tied to rebirth, strength, and royal authority. Alongside the gold lay numerous Byzantine solidi, proof of trade and diplomatic links stretching beyond Gaul even before Clovis's time. A gold signet ring inscribed with the words Childerici Regis, King Childeric, was irrefutable evidence of the tomb's owner. Other grave goods, a saddle, helmet, armor, and embroidered riding boots, painted a portrait of Childeric as both a Germanic war leader and a monarch shaped by Roman imperial tradition. The arrangement of these burial objects reflected a belief that gold served as a bridge between this world and the next. These treasures were not buried merely to display wealth, but to accompany the king, ensuring his continued authority and honor in the eternal realm. In the cold, damp silence of the tomb, the golden glow seemed to affirm that Merovingian power did not end with death. But the story of Childeric's tomb took a tragic turn. After excavation, most of the treasure was sent to Vienna as a diplomatic gift to the Holy Roman Emperor. Over a century later, in 1831, nearly all of it was stolen from the museum and thrown into the Seine to erase the crime. Only a fraction was recovered, depriving historians of the chance to study the hoard in its entirety. The brightest moment of Childeric's gold returning to the world was also the beginning of its transformation from reality into legend. Today, what survives? A few golden bees, the signet ring, fragments of weapons, is displayed in museums as fragile remnants of an entire legacy. They are not just archaeological artifacts. They are reminders that Merovingian gold was both brilliant and fleeting. And the tomb of Childeric, even in its incomplete state, remains a doorway to a larger question. If this was only one grave, then where are the other treasures? Those of Merovingian kings and queens. And when will they finally be found? If the tomb of Childeric I proved that Merovingian gold could return to the light after more than 1,000 years, then somewhere on the map of Europe there are still royal graves whose secrets have never been revealed. Unlike dynasties that built monumental tombs as grand declarations to posterity, the Merovingians favored discreet burials, sometimes directly beside newly built churches, other times in secluded royal cemeteries. This discretion was not merely a matter of custom or religious practice, but also a protective measure, for gold and grave treasures were always targets for greedy hands. Contemporary records suggest that royal funerals were conducted with solemn ceremony, yet almost never disclosed the precise location of the grave. Even Gregory of Tours, one of the most detailed chroniclers of Merovingian political life, mentions only vaguely the resting places of kings and queens. This may have been a deliberate choice to keep the information secret, or perhaps it was oral knowledge closely guarded within a very limited circle. In the turbulent 6th and 7th centuries, with wars and succession disputes unfolding constantly, concealing a royal tomb was a way to protect both the remains and the treasures buried with them. Modern archaeological surveys in Soissons, Metz, Paris, and other regions suggest that beneath the floors of certain ancient churches still lie crypts that have never been excavated. Their architecture, building materials, and spatial arrangements align with royal burial traditions, yet most remain untouched, partly due to concerns over disturbing sacred sites and partly because of the immense resources needed for large-scale excavation. Beyond archaeological clues, local legends have kept the mystery alive. In Lorraine, there is a tale of a Merovingian king buried with a golden chariot beneath the earth to continue his journey into the afterlife. In northern Burgundy, people speak of a queen interred in a gold-embroidered cloak with hundreds of gold coins scattered around her body. While these stories are impossible to verify, they fuel the possibility that some undiscovered graves may hold treasures equaled or even surpassing those of Childeric's tomb. The loss of these burial sites is not only an archaeological gap, but also a historical one. The discovery of an intact royal grave could yield vital clues about lineage, diplomatic relations, and even gold-working techniques never before recorded. DNA from the remains, inscriptions on grave goods, and the artistic style of artifacts could help answer questions that have lingered for centuries, and yet silence may be their last line of defense. These tombs have survived millennia of war, looting, and religious upheaval. They are like sealed time capsules, and when opened, they would not only resolve long-standing mysteries, but might also raise new ones, perhaps even challenging our entire understanding of the Merovingian dynasty. That is precisely why they remain an inseparable part of the dynasty's golden legend, treasures lying in stillness, waiting for the day they awaken. From the gaps archaeology has yet to fill, imagination and legend begin to weave themselves in, binding truth to fiction. Not every Merovingian treasure mentioned in historical records can be proven by surviving artifacts. Some of the most enduring stories live only in spoken word passed from one generation to the next, embroidered over time with details that grow ever more fantastical. In the Ardennes, they speak of King Dagobert's hoard hidden deep in a mysterious cave that opens only once every 100 years when the stars align with the moon. The entrance is guarded by figures clad in golden robes, neither living nor ghost. Anyone who tries to take the gold without being invited is said to vanish forever into the mountain, lost as if they had never existed. The tale has lured more than a few expeditions into the forest's depths, but all return only with hazy accounts and the haunted eyes of those who claim to have seen something they fully describe. Along the Lear, another story tells of a Merovingian king who, in the final days before his deposition, ordered the entire royal treasury to be cast into the depths of a forest lake. Locals believe that on moonless nights, faint golden glimmers can still be seen beneath the water's surface. Many have tried to dive for it, but most return empty-handed, and some never return at all. Certain legends carry a sharper political edge. One tells that when Merovingian power waned and the Carolingians began their rise, part of the royal treasure was spirited out of the capital by loyalists and hidden away in monasteries or secret underground vaults. This hoard, according to the tale, contained not only gold and jewels, but also ancient documents, trade maps, and even sacred relics that could tip the balance of power if revealed. In this version, some portion of Merovingian gold may still rest in monastic archives, guarded by centuries-old vows of silence. What is intriguing is that these stories are not confined to France or Belgium. In southern Germany and Lombardy, Italy, there are still whispers that Frankish gold traveled with military campaigns into these regions, and, when defeat loomed, was hastily buried to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. In some places, they claim such vaults were sealed with ancient mechanisms designed to open only when the true heir returns. Historians and archaeologists approach such tales with caution, drawing a clear line between the cultural value of legend and the material evidence of excavation. Yet it is precisely the absence of definitive data that allows these stories to outlive dry factual accounts. In the public imagination, Merovingian gold is not just precious metal. It is a promise of monumental discovery, the possibility that one day history might be rewritten by a chance find or a long-guarded secret finally unveiled. And it is at this threshold between fact and fable that the golden light of the Merovingians continues to shine in its own way. Not only in the artifacts displayed under museum lights, but also in the minds of those who believe that somewhere, buried deep in the earth or sealed behind an ancient door, a treasure still waits to return. If legend can keep the glow of Merovingian gold alive in the imagination, reality is far harsher. Some treasures did not drift into the misty realm of story, but into the hands of thieves, into the smelter's fire, or simply into the coffers of a new regime. And when that happened, history lost not only the precious objects themselves, but also the stories that once clung to them. The most famous loss remains the treasure of Childry Wiz's tomb, as mentioned earlier, when nearly all the artifacts unearthed in the 17th century were stolen in 1831 and thrown into the Seine to erase the crime. This episode, though only a small slice of the Merovingian saga, stands as a symbol of a larger truth. Much of the dynasty's golden heritage has vanished in ways the future can never recover. But disappearance did not occur only in modern times. Even during the Merovingian era itself, every succession, war, or power struggle carried the risk of the royal treasure being scattered. When one faction lost, its gold and valuables were often seized by rivals, then melted down into coinage or refashioned into ceremonial regalia for the new court. In the process, the origins of these objects were erased, and they became nameless pieces in the victor's hoard. Political and religious upheavals also contributed to the dissolution of the treasure. There were moments when rebellious lords once defeated saw their gold, often originally gifted or granted as war spoils from the crown, confiscated and distributed among the army as reward. During religious conflicts, many golden artifacts were hidden in churches or monasteries to avoid plunder, only to vanish, along with those who fled into exile or bartered them away for protection from foreign powers. Some disappearances were quieter still. Records from the 7th and 8th centuries show periods when the circulation of gold coins dropped sharply, coinciding with the time when actual power shifted into the hands of the mayors of the palace. Certain ceremonial objects once listed in royal inventories simply vanished from the records with no note of how or why. Such gaps leave historians to speculate. Were they lost to war, or were they deliberately transferred in carefully managed political deals, moving gold into the hands of the new power brokers? For archaeologists, whenever a Merovingian gold object surfaces on the antiquities market or in a private collection, the question is not only where it came from, but how it left history. Some may have once been part of buried hoards, but others could have been official regalia before being stolen or sold in secrecy. With little legal proof, these stories tend to survive only as rumor, balanced precariously between fact and hypothesis. The disappearance of these treasures impoverishes more than the physical collection. It directly affects how we understand the Merovingian world. Every lost piece of gold is a fragment of the larger picture of power, economy, and artistry removed from view. And when those pieces are gone, the gap is filled with speculation, myth, or at times fabricated stories meant to soften the sense of loss. From here, the story shifts. Gold was not only loot or display, but also a tool of political and diplomatic power in the Merovingian state. To grasp its full significance, we must look at how the court used gold to maintain and expand its influence not only on the battlefield, but also in the subtle agreements and elaborate rituals behind the scenes of power. In the power structure of the Merovingians, the church was not only a religious center, but also a repository of gold and treasures, a sacred treasury that could tip the political balance. Between the throne and the altar lay a complex relationship, cooperation to reinforce each other, but also quiet competition for influence. And the strongest tie binding the two, more than anything else, was gold. From the time Clovis converted to Catholicism, gold became the shared language of this alliance. Kings granted gold to churches and monasteries as a sign of piety, but it was also a shrewd political investment. A gold-covered altar, an intricately carved relic, or a jewel-encrusted cross all conveyed the message that the dynasty not only sponsored the faith, but safeguarded the material wealth and prestige of the church. When worshippers stepped into a space blazing with the shimmer of precious metal, they felt the presence of both God and the king who had brought that light there. For the church, royal gold did more than beautify places of worship. It provided the means to build and adorn structures, extend the influence of bishops, and turn monasteries into centers of craftsmanship and book production. Some monasteries even acted as sacred banks, where the monarchy could deposit gold to shield it from theft or wartime loss. The religious authority of these sites made them secure vaults and also bargaining chips when politics shifted. The relationship was not one-sided. The church also used gold to strengthen royal authority. At coronations, the gleam of the golden crown, the golden cross, and the chalice on the altar created the image that the throne itself was blessed by God. In the eyes of the people, opposing the king meant opposing the sacred order. This was an invisible but highly effective shield protecting the dynasty from direct challenges. Yet such closeness carried risks. When a king's political power waned, bishops and monasteries holding vast reserves of gold could emerge as independent centers of power. They could use these resources to fund factions or negotiate with enemies, sometimes against royal interests. Records suggest that church treasure was at times secretly funneled to mayors of the palace or powerful lords capable of altering the course of the dynasty. In internal power struggles, royal gold was often given to the church in exchange for political support, while church gold could be loaned to finance military campaigns or bolster a faction. The boundary between sacred gold and secular gold thus became blurred. The golden glow on the altar sometimes masked closed-door agreements made in the shadows. On a broader scale, the gold church connection reflected a core truth of the Merovingian era. Secular and spiritual power were never separate. Both relied on gold to sustain influence and prestige. Gold in the church could guide the soul toward faith while reminding all that the dynasty's political authority was anchored in the economic and symbolic power of this precious metal. And as the 7th century approached, when mayors of the palace began to surpass the king in real power, the flow of gold between the crown and the church shifted. Whoever controlled the gold would control the balance of influence. From here, the story moves into a new phase, when gold became the tool by which those outside the royal bloodline could rewrite the fate of the Merovingian dynasty. In Merovingian politics, gold was not just a symbol of wealth or a means to purchase goods. It was a soft weapon capable of shifting the balance of power faster than an army. In the 6th to 7th century chessboard of power, swords and troops were the visible weapons, but gold was the lubricant for every gear, keeping the machinery of authority turning smoothly, or stopping it entirely if withdrawn. For Merovingian kings, gold was the tool that transformed potential rivals into allies. A border chieftain granted a golden necklace, a gilded weapon, or a generous payment could shift from adversary to protector of the frontier. In peace negotiations, the exchange of gold was often seen as a tangible pledge, binding both sides to uphold the agreement. More than a few treaties were signed immediately after envoys left the royal court with chests full of gleaming trimesses. On a broader scale, gold was vital for securing the loyalty of the nobility. A lord granted the right to collect taxes along a lucrative trade route, or given a share of the spoils from a campaign, had every reason to remain loyal to the crown. But if that flow of gold was cut off, loyalty could dissolve quickly. Contemporary chronicles often summarize the cause of a rebellion in just a few words: the treasury was empty. Gold was also a means of controlling information and influence. Monks, court historians, and chroniclers, the shapers of the king's public image, were often rewarded with gold or land. In return, they composed annals praising the dynasty's virtues, projecting an image of unshakable power to the people and to foreign courts. In such cases, gold became the ink with which history itself was written. Yet this weapon was a double-edged sword. As the king's real authority waned, the mayors of the palace, the majores domus, learned to use gold to build networks of influence for themselves. By distributing gold directly to nobles or granting rights to lucrative revenues, figures such as Pippin of Herstal or Grimoald created a patronage system parallel to the monarchy. The balance began to tilt toward them, and the Merovingian throne gradually lost much of its actual power. Gold also seeped into the succession process. A prince with little claim to the throne could become king if he had enough gold to buy the support of nobles, the church, and the army. Conversely, a legitimate heir without gold might find it nearly impossible to hold the crown. This factor led to many bloody disputes and tragedies, underscoring that in Merovingia, true strength was measured by the ability to command the flow of precious metal. On the international stage, gold was a tool for maintaining temporary peace with neighboring powers. Sending gold to the Lombards, Avars, or certain Scandinavian tribes was not a sign of weakness, but a way to buy time, keeping the borders calm while consolidating internal strength. In the diplomacy of the era, gold could substitute for blood, at least until the balance of power shifted. From every angle, gold in Merovingian hands was never static property. It was a current of energy sustaining alliances, quelling conflicts, and at times stirring undercurrents that shook the throne itself. And when that current began to slip from the king's grasp, it found its way into other hands, those clever enough to use it to rewrite the rules of the entire kingdom. By the latter half of the 7th century, the golden current of the Merovingians no longer flowed solely between lords and the royal court. It began moving with increasing force among 3 axes of power: the crown, the church, and the mayors of the palace, men who managed the machinery of government, yet were growing ever more confident in acting as de facto rulers. In this game of power, gold was both the glue that could temporarily bind alliances and the blade that could sever them the moment interests shifted. Since the time of Clovis, gold had served as a bridge between the dynasty and the Catholic Church. The king endowed churches with gold-clad buildings and precious metal reliquaries, receiving in return the clergy's recognition and blessing. But as the mayors of the palace rose, they too realized that the road to supreme power did not lead only through the battlefield. It also passed by the altar. By pouring gold into strategic monasteries or gifting treasures to influential bishops, they gradually encroached on a realm once considered the royal prerogative. This forced the church into careful calculation. A monastery lavishly supported by a mayor would become his natural ally in a power struggle, even if such allegiance displeased the king. For bishops, gold was a means to construct new churches, expand dioceses, and consolidate personal influence. And that gold could come from anyone willing to pay the price. The result was a shifting balance of religious power. In earlier times, the coronation ritual with the golden crown and gilded cross upon the altar symbolized the unity of throne and altar. Now such symbols could appear in ceremonies sponsored by the mayor of the palace, sending a pointed message. He too could claim legitimacy in the name of the faith. In many regions, gold was given not just for spiritual endorsement, but to secure direct control over the church's resources. A powerful mayor might fund the copying of sacred texts or the construction of chapels, with the unspoken condition that these institutions serve his political ends. For the royal house to maintain its position, Merovingian kings were forced to double their efforts and double their expenditures to keep the church within their orbit. This rivalry turned gold into the ultimate ballot in clerical decision-making. A bishop who received gold and privileges from both sides would weigh carefully which patron offered the longer-term advantage, rather than relying on traditional loyalties. And when gold became the deciding factor, the spiritual values the church claimed to uphold were inevitably drawn into the realm of pragmatic calculation. Viewed broadly, this was an era in which gold not only sustained the link between the secular and the sacred, but transformed that link into a contested arena. The crown and the mayors of the palace poured gold into the same system, each hoping to tip the balance their way. But In doing so, both eroded the throne's image as the sole font of authority, and in the process cleared the path for those outside the royal bloodline to take one step closer to the ultimate goal, replacing the Merovingians in name as well as in fact. As the 7th century turned into the 8th, the flow of gold that had once passed through the hands of Merovingian kings began finding a new master. The mayors of the palace from the Pippinide family, the lineage history would later know as the Carolingians. Their power did not initially come from the crown, but from their strategic position within the machinery of royal administration. Controlling the treasury, collecting taxes, distributing war spoils, and overseeing royal estates, they had direct access to every stream of gold entering and leaving the kingdom. Pippin of Herstal was a prime example, holding the mayoralty in both Austrasia and Neustria. He commanded the two largest economic centers of the realm. Pippin used gold as the glue binding his network of power, rewarding his armies generously, funding loyal nobles, endowing strategic monasteries, and gifting treasures to influential bishops. Every coin he gave away did more than secure loyalty. It chipped away pieces of influence from the Merovingian king. This shift unfolded quietly but persistently. At first, the king's name still appeared on the distributions of gold, but the real supply and its route were determined by the mayor. When a noble received land, a monastery received a reliquary, or a troop of soldiers was paid, everyone knew whose hand had truly signed that check. Meanwhile, internal trade routes for gold were redirected toward Carolingian-controlled territories, Aurasia, their patronized monasteries, and the lands of their closest allies. The key point was that the Carolingians did not simply hoard gold. They reinvested it in power, purchasing the finest war horses and weapons, employing skilled craftsmen, and maintaining a mobile, well-equipped army ready to respond to any crisis. Meanwhile, the Merovingian kings relied more and more on ceremony to uphold their image, but they lacked the economic resources to enforce genuine authority. The rise of Charles Martel, son of Pippin of Herstal, marked the tipping point. He used gold to sustain a force of elite cavalry, the very troops who won at Tours in 732, halting the advance of Muslim armies into Gaul. That victory not only secured his military reputation, but also established the Carolingians as the true defenders of the realm, protectors in both military and economic terms. On the surface, the Merovingian king still wore the crown at ceremonies, but most of the gold on display had been sourced, prepared, and allocated by Carolingian hands. Lavish banquets, military campaigns, and grand religious rituals all bore their imprint, even if the official name attached to them was still the king's. The public gradually became accustomed to the reality that real power no longer resided on the throne, but in those who controlled the flow of gold behind it. To seize the gold was to hold the key to reshaping the structure of authority. Carolingian patronage of monasteries was not only an act of piety, but also a way to create economic, political centers entirely within their control. Every coin flowing through this network tightened the bond between the church and the Carolingians while pushing the Merovingian kings further to the margins. By this point, the question of the Carolingians replacing the Merovingians was no longer if, but when and how. The gold had changed hands, and with it the power to decide the fate of the entire kingdom. What remained to the Merovingian kings was only the gilded shell of ceremony, a golden light still dazzling to the eye, but hollow within, reflecting a power they had already let slip away. The shift of power from the Merovingian kings to the Carolingians did not come through a loud, decisive coup, but rather like a great river quietly changing its course, slow, steady, and impossible to reverse. Once a coin, a treasure, or a right to collect taxes had flowed into the new network, it never returned to the old system. And by the mid-8th century, that network lay entirely in Carolingian hands. At first, the Carolingians were careful to preserve appearances. Gold distributions were still recorded under the king's name, and ceremonies were staged as though the throne still gave the orders. But in reality, the roots of gold, from trade tariffs and tributes to war spoils, were directed by the mayor of the palace. Nobles, monasteries, or military commanders who received gold knew exactly who had truly authorized their reward. Loyalty, as a result, was no longer tied to the royal title, but to the source of the gold that sustained their power. The movement of gold within the kingdom was also reorganized. Once, gold had been concentrated in the royal capital before being distributed from the center. Now it traveled through a decentralized network. Its nodes located in Carolingian territory or in regions held by trusted allies. Austrasia became the logistical heart of gold distribution. Patronized monasteries served as secure vaults, and key fortresses acted as checkpoints controlling the flow. What made this system so effective was that the Carolingians never let gold sit idle. They treated it as a revolving investment, buying war horses, commissioning weapons from the finest workshops, paying the wages of a mobile cavalry force, and funding the construction of border defenses. Each expenditure struck two targets at once, strengthening territorial security and expanding the web of loyalty. Control over gold also meant control over religion. Monasteries and churches that had once received royal gold now lived off Carolingian patronage. When this supply became their lifeblood, the church found it difficult to turn its back on its true benefactors. Over time, the right to grant spiritual blessing, once the exclusive domain of the Merovingian crown, was shared and then quietly acknowledged, with the understanding that the Carolingians were equally, if not more, deserving of authority. Meanwhile, the Merovingian kings were increasingly confined to ceremonial roles. They appeared at coronations, rode at the head of processions, attended banquets, but no longer determined the roots of gold, which meant they no longer decided the fate of the kingdom. For the nobility, loyalty to the king became a matter of ritual. Their survival and prosperity depended on Carolingian generosity. By the middle of the 8th century, the gold network was so complete that replacing the occupant of the throne was simply the final step. When gold, the ultimate emblem of authority, had left Merovingian hands and rested firmly in Carolingian control, the throne became nothing more than an empty seat, retained only as a facade for the ongoing transfer of power. And when the moment was ripe, that facade would be stripped away, revealing the new order the Carolingians had been quietly building for decades. When the last of the Merovingian gold left their hands, it lost not only its economic value, but also the meaning accumulated over generations. The royal treasury, once a symbol of the dynasty and a tangible link to the authorities stretching back to Clovis, now became political spoils. The Carolingians did not merely inherit it, they deliberately reshaped it to serve a new narrative, that they were the rightful heirs worthy of holding both crown and gold. Many of the most symbolic treasures, the crown, ceremonial sword, golden cross, and cathedral ornaments, were not destroyed but repurposed for ceremonies under the new regime. When they appeared, the story accompanying them had changed. The crown once worn by a Merovingian king was now presented as the crown of the Frankish kingdom in general. Detached from any specific royal lineage, the sword that had once embodied Merovingian authority became a symbol of Carolingian victory over an era now portrayed as weak and outdated. Not all golden legacies kept their original form. Part of the treasure was melted down to mint new coins bearing Carolingian imagery and symbols. This served both a practical purpose, turning assets into circulating currency, and a symbolic one, erasing traces of the old dynasty from the very substance of the gold and replacing them with a new identity. It was a conquest not only of wealth, but of memory. The transformation extended into religion. Monasteries and churches that had once guarded treasures donated by the Merovingians were now under Carolingian patronage. Inscriptions and records of the original donors were gradually ignored or replaced with new names. A gilded chalice or jewel-encrusted relic might still shine on the altar, but the story of the hand that first bestowed it was quietly consigned to oblivion. Yet this appropriation did not mean total destruction. In keeping and reusing many Merovingian treasures, the Carolingians inadvertently ensured their survival through centuries of upheaval. Some artifacts preserved in the new royal treasury escaped the fate of being looted or lost in civil wars. But by the time they reached later generations, they retained only their physical form and materials. Their original story had been altered or erased. The redefinition of the gold also reshaped how history remembered the Merovingians. Once their physical symbols were stripped away or given new meanings, the collective memory of a wealthy and powerful dynasty gave way to the image of the do-nothing kings, monarchs who sat on the throne while others ruled in their stead. Gold, once the proof of a glorious age, was retold as the rightful reward for more deserving successors. And yet, even when redefined, Merovingian gold left an indelible mark on European royal art, craftsmanship, and aesthetics. The cloisonné patterns, the meticulous engraving, the pairing of gemstones with gold. These continued to thrive in Carolingian works and in the dynasties that followed. In this sense, the Merovingian legacy did not vanish. It hid in plain sight, woven into the shared cultural stream, like gold that still glimmers beneath a fresh layer of gilding. From here, the story of Merovingian gold moves into a new chapter, one in which it is no longer the exclusive property of a single dynasty, but a material for building the legacy of victors, while quietly passing down its aesthetic, technical, and symbolic influence to generations yet to come. When Merovingian gold entered the Carolingian treasury, it did not disappear from history. On the contrary, its distinctive aesthetics, craftsmanship, and artistic sensibilities continued to spread, merging seamlessly into the current of medieval European art. In sculpture, jewelry, and ceremonial objects of later centuries, one can still trace the imprint of the Merovingian golden hand, like a quiet thread linking a forgotten past to a celebrated present. One of the most recognizable legacies was the cloisonné technique, the method of dividing a metal surface into small compartments with thin gold strips, then inlaying them with gemstones, colored enamel, or glass. Under the Merovingians, cloisonné was not merely a decorative technique, but a symbolic language. Each animal motif, the hunting bird, the warhorse, the wolf, carried meanings of strength, protection, or authority. The Carolingians not only inherited this skill, but refined it further, applying it to ceremonial weapons, crowns, crosses, and even the ornate covers of illuminated gospel books. The Merovingian color palette left an equally deep mark: warm gold paired with garnet red, sapphire blue, and the cobalt blue of glass enamel. This contrast was not only visually striking, but also imbued with layered meaning: red for power and sacrifice, blue for faith and eternity, all framed in gold as a symbol of divine radiance. Carolingian artisans preserved this palette, making it a signature of early medieval royal art. In jewelry, the Merovingian influence appeared in intricate detailing: rings, brooches, and necklaces with raised patterns, gemstones set in solid, continuous panels. Even as shapes evolved with changing fashion, the craftsmanship maintained its richness of surface detail and the careful balance between form and the reflected light of gold. Artifacts found in England, Italy, and Scandinavia, created decades or even a century after the fall of the Merovingians, still show a clear stylistic kinship, evidence of a far-reaching artistic exchange network. Merovingian influence also persisted in religious art. Carolingian relics, chalices, and processional crosses often blended the grandeur of Byzantine style with the lively intricacy of Merovingian workmanship. The lines were soft and fluid, avoiding stiffness, giving an impression at once solemn and approachable. In some cases, the very materials, gold reworked from the Merovingian treasury, turned these pieces into a physical and symbolic bridge between the two dynasties. The influence reached beyond the aristocracy. Folk artisans adapted the Merovingian style into jewelry and household items for the well-to-do. They simplified motifs, replaced solid gold with bronze or gilded alloys, yet retained the same spirit of color, harmony, geometric shaping, and attention to fine detail. In this way, Merovingian aesthetics seeped into daily life, transcending the boundaries of courtly power. From an art historical perspective, Merovingian gold transcended its fate as a lost treasure. It became an aesthetic foundation for many of the medieval period's artistic achievements, living on in every carved line, every inlaid stone, and every golden reflection flickering under candlelight. Even as the name Merovingian was pushed to the margins of official history, the hands and eyes of its craftsmen endured, speaking across centuries through works that long outlived the dynasty that created them. If Merovingian gold left a deep mark on royal and religious art, its impact on medieval European craftsmanship spread even further, like an underground current carrying techniques, aesthetics, and trade secrets from one generation to the next. This is not just the story of luxury items for kings and queens, but of the creation of an entire production infrastructure, a network of artisans and technical standards that reached across the continent. Under the mayors of the Merovingians, gold and gemstone working centers emerged in strategic locations such as Paris, Metz, Soissons, Reims, and towns along major rivers. These workshops served not only the royal court, but also local nobles, monasteries, and even foreign clients. Techniques such as cloisonné, filigree, shaping designs from fine gold wires, repoussé, hammering designs from the reverse side, and surface engraving were standardized and elevated to an art form. From there, these methods spread to England, Italy, and the Nordic world through trade, political marriages, and the migration of craftsmen. One of the most distinctive Merovingian traits was their treatment of gold as a flexible material. Rather than forming heavy solid masses, they combined gold with gemstones, colored glass, pearls, and enamel to create pieces that were light, intricate, yet durable. This approach directly influenced Carolingian, Anglo-Saxon, and even Viking metalwork, where artisans adopted this light touch, rich in detail, yet without unnecessary weight, for jewelry and ceremonial objects. The training system for craftsmen was another vital legacy. Merovingian goldsmith workshops often operated within a structure that prefigured later guilds, master craftsmen, journeymen, and apprentices. Skills ranging from alloying gold to achieve the desired hue, to setting gemstones for optimal light reflection, were passed down orally and through hands-on practice, forming a durable craft lineage. Thanks to this model, many Merovingian techniques survived wars, political upheavals, and dynastic change. Merovingian artisans also excelled in recycling and restoration. When an older gold object was damaged or went out of fashion, they could dismantle, melt, and repurpose the material without diminishing its value. This practice reflected a pragmatic mindset, but also created a continuous life cycle for gold, ensuring it was always in active service for political, ceremonial, or personal needs. It is one reason why many Carolingian and later artifacts still contain Merovingian details and motifs. They were literally fashioned from the gold of the previous age. Their influence also lay in connecting a global supply network. Gold from the Mediterranean, gemstones from India and Sri Lanka, pearls from the Red Sea, and glass enamel from Byzantium all converged in the same pieces. This required not only masterful craftsmanship, but also commercial and diplomatic skill to secure materials. As this model passed to later dynasties, it fostered one of Europe's earliest international craft styles, blending local aesthetics with exotic materials and foreign techniques. Viewed more broadly, the Merovingian craft legacy was not just about technique, but about mindset. Gold was not inert matter, but a medium for connecting people, lands, and power. From small workshops along the Seine or the Rhine, the seeds of this style and skill took root in distant regions, forming the foundation for the great flowering of precious metal art in Europe from the 9th to the 12th centuries. For this reason, when looking at a later royal crown or a great church cross, one can still glimpse the hand and eye of Merovingian artisans, those who turned gold into a shared language of power and beauty, ensuring their legacy would live on in every meticulous detail. Today, the treasures of the Merovingians no longer lie intact in secret tombs or royal treasuries, but are scattered across museums throughout Europe, each artifact a fragment of the once complete portrait of power. The surviving gold, jewelry, weapons, and ceremonial objects are not only proof of the era's masterful craftsmanship, but also clues that help reconstruct the story of a dynasty long overshadowed in official history. At the Louvre in Paris, a selection of Merovingian golden gemstones is displayed under soft lighting, spaced just enough for each object to shine on its own. Cloisonné brooches, once fastened to noble cloaks or royal military attire, still blaze with garnet red and sapphire blue after more than a millennium. Look closely and the tiny gold cells fit so tightly together that the joins are nearly invisible, a testament to workmanship that transcends time. The Royal Museum of Marmont in Belgium holds a few surviving objects from the tombs of children, rare remnants left after the theft of 1831. The gold ring engraved Children Regis remains intact, its lettering as sharp as if it had just left the goldsmith's hand. The famous golden bees associated with the tomb now number only a few dozen. Yet, arranged together, they still evoke the image of a ceremonial cloak once radiant in the light of ritual. At the Germanisches National Museum in Nuremberg and the British Museum in London, the Merovingian collections are small but highly curated, consisting mainly of jewelry and ceremonial weapons recovered from noble burials. Swords with gold and gem-encrusted hilts and scabbards, necklaces set with emeralds. These were not merely personal adornments, but declarations of status. Strikingly, many such finds come from regions far from the political core, revealing that Merovingian influence and exchange networks reached farther than often assumed. Some of the best preserved Merovingian treasures remain in the custody of church and monastic archives. Here, chalices, reliquaries, and golden crosses, once gifted by Merovingian rulers, are still guarded as sacred relics. They retain not only their material value, but are also surrounded by a halo of religious sanctity that makes access difficult. Whenever such an object is brought out for public display, it is a rare opportunity to witness the golden light of a bygone age. Yet, the dispersal of Merovingian artifacts poses a challenge for research. With no single treasure hoard to study, historians and archaeologists must piece together information from many sources, comparing craftsmanship, analyzing metal alloys, and cross-referencing styles to establish provenance. The process is like assembling a jigsaw puzzle in which several pieces are forever missing. Even so, what survives in museums holds a unique power. These objects are not mere display pieces, but silent witnesses to a time when gold was measured not only in economic value, but also in power, faith, and artistry. Each piece is a small door into a world more than 1,000 years past, a world where gold reflected not just light, but also the stories, people, and ambitions that shaped the history of the Merovingians. If today's museums hold in their vaults the scattered fragments of the Merovingian gold story, then beneath Europe's soil, countless secrets remain untouched. And it is the very uncertainty of their existence that has sparked a modern wave of searching, a quest where professional archaeology, cutting-edge technology, and the adventurous drive of private treasure hunters merge into a complex, multicolored picture. Archaeologists approach this work with patience and scientific method. They draw on ancient maps, medieval records, and anomalies in the soil strata to narrow down potential sites. Modern technology has become indispensable. Ground-penetrating radar, GPR, to detect tombs or buried structures, high-powered metal detectors to pick up traces of gold or precious alloys, and aerial LiDAR scanning to reveal subtle shifts in the terrain, the ghost outlines of structures long since buried under forest or earth. With these tools, several forgotten Merovingian cemeteries have been identified in regions like Champagne and Lorraine, though most remain unexcavated to preserve them intact. Alongside official archaeology, the world of private treasure hunting plays a role, though a controversial one. Their motivation is often a blend of discovery, thrill, and the lure of legend. Some finds are pure chance, such as the discovery of a Merovingian gold jewelry set in a Belgian field in 2014 by an amateur with a metal detector. But there are also stories of disappointment when items recovered illegally lose their scientific context, rendering them almost worthless for research. For many scholars, Merovingian gold is more than material wealth. It is the key to answering bigger questions: the true scale of royal riches, the reach of trade networks, the relationship between secular and religious power, and the reasons why so many treasures disappeared. Even the smallest new find can shift our understanding of this period. Yet the search is anything but easy. Many potential sites lie beneath modern infrastructure or private land, requiring complex legal and financial negotiations. Others are located within religious preserves or national heritage zones, making excavation virtually impossible. And there is always the shadow of illicit digging, looters willing to destroy archaeological context for a handful of gold, causing irreparable loss to science. Even so, advances in technology and international collaboration are offering hope. Interdisciplinary projects combining history, archaeology, geology, and DNA analysis promise not only to recover gold, but to reconstruct the full picture of Merovingian society. One day, the excavation of an untouched royal tomb could yield a treasure of both material wealth and knowledge, perhaps forcing us to rewrite a chapter of Europe's so-called Dark Ages. In this way, the modern search is not merely about pursuing objects that glitter, but about reclaiming a collective memory buried deep in the earth. And if one day that golden light returns to the sun, it will tell not only of the Merovingians' wealth, but also of the modern human effort to reconnect the scattered fragments of a story more than 1,000 years in the making. Gold in any era carries with it a power that is difficult to explain. It is at once a tangible material and an idea of wealth, power, permanence, and temptation. With Merovingian gold, that allure is even stronger, for it is bound to a time when the gleam of this precious metal was not confined to the throne, but radiated through the entire political, religious, and cultural framework of early medieval Europe. Part of the enchantment comes from the physical nature of gold itself. Untarnished and unfaded, it remains virtually unchanged over time. When a Merovingian gold brooch is unearthed after more than 1,000 years, the light it reflects is almost the same as the day it left the goldsmith's hand. That moment of seeing its glow creates a direct, unmediated connection between present and past, an experience few other materials can offer. But Merovingian gold is more than material. It is the gold of stories. Every artifact discovered carries with it a chain of questions. Who owned it? What roads did it travel? Did it come from a distant mine, through the hands of a Gaulish goldsmith to the royal treasury? Was it given in a coronation, exchanged in a peace negotiation, or buried alongside a warrior in death? Each question is a door into an entire world, making the finder a direct participant in history. Its appeal also lies in the absence. Most Merovingian gold has disappeared, melted down, stolen, or hidden, and what survives is only the tip of the iceberg. That gap fuels curiosity. If this is all we can see, how magnificent must the unseen be? This very lack turns each new discovery into an event not just for archaeologists, but for the public, still drawn to the image of a lost treasure and the desire to reclaim it. On a symbolic level, Merovingian gold is a mirror reflecting humanity's deepest ambitions. It speaks of power fortified by wealth, of endurance guaranteed by incorruptible matter, and of beauty preserved through the hand of the artisan. In the modern world, where value is often measured in invisible numbers on financial markets, gold retains an instinctive pull, something you can touch, feel the weight of, and know has traveled through centuries to reach you. What makes Merovingian gold particularly poignant is the paradox it embodies. It is a symbol of absolute power, but also a witness to power's fragility. The Merovingian kings once held treasures that commanded the admiration of Europe, yet that golden light could not halt the erosion from within. That story transforms gold from a mere object into a reminder. All power, no matter how dazzling, can change hands. For this reason, Merovingian gold does not live only in museum cases. It thrives in the imagination. It moves from tomb to museum, from historical record to novel, from reality to legend. And in each place, it finds new ways to captivate. Perhaps its greatest allure lies not in the question of who will own it, but in the feeling that there is still something undiscovered, a story not yet fully told, waiting for us to find it. In the modern era, Merovingian gold, once locked away in ancient tombs or displayed behind museum glass, has stepped beyond the boundaries of archaeology and historiography to become a living symbol in popular culture. The image of the treasure of the long-haired kings no longer belongs solely to the pages of history books. It has seeped into novels, films, video games, and even the thriving realm of internet conspiracy theories. As early as the 19th century, archaeological discoveries such as the tomb of Childeric the Found captured the public imagination. Newspapers of the day described the treasure in almost mythical terms, a golden light pouring out from the earth, royal emblems never before seen. These vivid images, imprinted in collective memory, laid the groundwork for Merovingian gold to become a literary motif, the mysterious treasure bound to a dynasty obscured by official history. By the 20th and 21st centuries, the Merovingians had entered the world of historical mystery fiction. Works like Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and the Da Vinci Code, though controversial for their historical accuracy, placed the Merovingians at the center of theories about royal bloodlines, the Knights Templar, and treasures hidden by the Vatican. In such narratives, Merovingian gold is not mere material wealth, but the key to unlocking religious and political secrets powerful enough to shake the foundations of European history. Cinema has also reinforced this image. In historical dramas set in the early Middle Ages, golden treasure often appears as the ultimate prize. In fantasy films, props inspired by cloisonné work, Merovingian crowns, or ceremonial swords are used to evoke a sense of both mystery and authority. Even in the Matrix franchise, the character called the Merovingian is portrayed as a figure of immense hidden power, a direct metaphor for the idea of a dynasty both magnificent and concealed. The world of video games has been quick to draw from this well of inspiration. In titles like Assassin's Creed, Merovingian artifacts are often reimagined as rare items, rewards for completing difficult quests. In this way, the Merovingian name reaches a younger audience, further thickening the layers of legend surrounding their legacy. Online, Merovingian gold has become the focal point of numerous conspiracy theories. Some believe the treasure still exists intact, hidden away by secret descendants of the dynasty. Others claim it was seized by the Vatican or shadowy societies to maintain their grip on power. While evidence is scarce, these stories continue to draw large followings, blending real history, dramatic flair, and the deeply ingrained human desire to decode the mystery. What makes the Merovingians so easily transformed into a cultural icon is that their gold represents not just wealth, but a historical void, a period simplified or rewritten by the victors. That void is fertile ground for imagination, where sparse fragments of evidence can be woven into an entire tapestry of intrigue. In popular culture, Merovingian gold is therefore not confined to a museum display case. It is alive as a character in its own right, gleaming, elusive, simultaneously real and mythical. Now, as the story reaches its final pages, Merovingian gold, beamed after more than 1,000 years, still shines quietly. Its brilliance is not confined to treasures resting behind museum glass or hidden beneath layers of earth that guard their secrets, but lives on in books, film frames, and the human imagination. That golden light reflects both glory and tragedy, both the strength and fragility of power, reminding us that every dynasty, no matter how radiant, is built on a foundation that time and human hands can shift. We have traced every thread of gold from the moment it flowed into Gaul, becoming the heartbeat of the Frankish economy, to when it turned into a political instrument on the chessboard of Europe and gleamed in royal ceremony. We have also seen it change hands, be redefined, and more than once vanish from humanity's grasp, sometimes leaving fragments of artifacts, sometimes only echoes preserved in legend. Woven between archaeological evidence is a network of myths, conspiracies, and crafted stories, making that golden light both real and unreal, both close and far away. From this, Merovingian gold leaves us with many lessons. First, it shows the inseparable bond between wealth and power. When the flow of gold left royal hands and entered those of the mayors of the palace, real authority shifted with it. Second, gold is a double-edged symbol. It can strengthen legitimacy and assert status, yet just as easily become the target of ambition and the tool of a successor. Third, the fate of material heritage shows that collective memory is not always a truthful mirror of the past. It is often selective, rewritten, or filled with stories that serve the needs of the present. Yet perhaps the most enduring value of Merovingian gold lies not in the bars of metal or the jeweled ornaments, but in its ability to connect people across time. A gold brooch crafted more than 13 centuries ago can still make our eyes light up. A tale of a lost treasure can still spark curiosity as vividly as the day it was first told. In the vast space between past and present, gold becomes a shining thread, linking us to the people who once lived, fought, schemed, and dreamed under the skies of Europe's dark ages. An era which, as we have seen, was far from as dark as its name suggests. But perhaps the story is not yet over. Beneath the soil in sealed archives or within pages yet to be deciphered, there may still be pieces of gold no one has touched. One day, a chance discovery might completely change how we see this dynasty, like a new ray of light striking a gemstone, revealing a color never seen before. And when that day comes, the question will remain, is the greatest treasure the gold that was lost, or the knowledge we gained in the search for it? Thank you for joining me until the very end of Merovingian Gold, Hidden Riches of the Dark Ages. If you found this story intriguing and would like me to continue these historical excavations, please leave a comment with your thoughts. Hit the like button and subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter. The golden light of the past still has many places to shine, and I look forward to exploring them with you.